This street, named after Richard Wagner, the great German composer, who in this city was really known as the great debtor, since he would run up a big pile of debts for 3 years he was here, running a theater that's down here a little ways, we'll find it. And then he would escape from here and go to some other city, rip them off for a few years. Finally he went to Germany and as a composer became famous. It was in this building, which was a theater that he ran for 3 years. This is, I believe, where he lived, but you don't know that I'm telling you the truth. So it's not going to make any difference, but the lesson to be gained is that if you come to this town of Riga, Latvia, rip the people off for a 3-year period, then they may name a street and a few other things after you. Of course, perhaps requires that you create great symphonies and that sort of thing afterward, but, or it could be here. Let historians find out the correct one. This is the Pharmacy Museum directly across the street, almost from the bicycle shop and the last place I showed you. A couple of interesting buildings. Whether these qualify as Art Nouveau, I don't know that much about it. This is where the famous medieval restaurant is, and maybe I can get in here today or tonight and see it. We'll see. How much of this is original, I don't know. 1293 is the date. 1200s were the beginning of the great power. Just have to come back. I'd already seen this place, just didn't record that I already knew about it. Look at that large grinding wheel embedded in the ground. Here an old chest, the kind of thing we would have expected to see in that warehouse or port house at the open air museum yesterday. Of course, is lovely about old towns are these old winding streets, which you can be almost positive reflect the almost random placing of houses and animal paths as they moved from pasture to pasture to the barn, or what I can plug in that last footage in where I made my first walkabout and saw this restaurant here. Just a block over again, that same curving road scheme. Okay, now let's go back to the Pharmacy Museum. This is a pretty old building, tucked back behind these others that have been built in front of it since its glory days. In the original building, so we'll go up this stairway to the museum. Pretty spiraling stairway, steep but pretty. Some kind of something preserved. Perhaps the pharmacist's traveling cabinet. An array of pestles and bottles. That's interesting. Probably was not on the second floor originally, but it is the remaining furniture from a pharmacy in English, so your best guess, early pharmacist. This a laboratory, but maybe a fairly advanced one. Apparently being stalked by a docent. A little portable packet of vials. collection of things that were thought to have medicinal value. They tried, but they had no knowledge. So this is the black room for the care of newborns, and perhaps those represent herbs and so forth whose aroma might have been presumed to help. Childbirth was not an absolute in those days. Of course, it isn't now. That's interesting, some kind of a distillery. It's amazing to realize how simple things that we don't even think about in the process were major innovative achievements in their day, like distillation. Various medicine cabinets. Once the patient had enough stuff to make it worthwhile. A chart of various kinds of plants that were probably important to the pharmacist of the day. This is a Soviet Union anti-smoking poster. Many museums, this is just a repository for the few artifacts left. Here's the shell of an old building, barely held together by large steel U-beams, probably on both sides of that wall, keep it from collapsing. It may be that EU rule that you can alter a building as long as you keep the facade, but if you have to tear it down, then a whole new set of building codes comes into play and you end up with this kind of stuff. Looking for this synagogue, but it's hidden on a side street, and one way I noticed it was I happened to be standing right next to it. Right across the street. In fact, it is right across the street from that old building on a relatively nondescript street, which probably from their viewpoints, a good place to keep it.